This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson. Yes, welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is your host, Harry Wilkinson. And welcome to the conversation. This is the show where we take a look at days and weeks events, happenings in the world, happenings in the political landscape, internationally, in science, technology, everything that we hear about, interact with, everything that concerns us, or that we think concerns us, and we take a look at it from a higher perspective. What do I mean by a higher perspective? Well, if you're a regular listener of the show, or if you've tuned in before, you know what I mean by that. It's a point of view that is, well, you might call it metaphysical. You might call it spiritual. It has to do with an understanding or a focus on how we interact with the daily world and how we actually are creating everything that we encounter, everything that we interact with. We are creating it all, and we've created kind of an illusory trick to make us think that these things are happening to us instead of coming from us. And we do this for a variety of reasons, but most of all because of the fact that at the highest level of our being, we are infinite mind and so powerful that we can't experience the things that we would normally experience in our human form, if you will. So that's a sort of a very brief thumbnail sketch of what I mean when I say that. I talk about this at the beginning of every show, and it's something that many people are starting to really embrace or accept or understand in their lives, and some find it completely puzzling. But I invite you to stay listening even if you're puzzled. If something intrigues you, see if it rings any bells for you. This is not a religious show, as we'll talk about, and we very much encourage all points of view. I talk about different religions. I talk about different belief systems. I talk about all kinds of things that have to do with spirituality. And one of the main things that I talk about is that there is a difference between spirituality and religion. Religious belief and practice are often times not only not spiritual, they often conflict with spirituality, at least one's own exploration of that. And that's something we'll talk about too as we talk about some of our best of topics that we had over the past year. This is part 2 of our best of program. So last week I began looking into the topics and the shows that were the most popular over the past year, the ones that I got comments on and the ones that got the most listeners and got the most interests. So we talked about that, and we found that there were really 4 main topics that were of most interest to folks who tuned into the show and got the most sort of hits, if you will. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is a 2 to 3 part series that we did earlier in the year on mysticism and mystical thought. So in mysticism, the idea of mysticism, as it's come to be known, is the idea of becoming one with all that is, or In some cases, if you want to use the G word, God, you can use that, or the absolute, or uh, any kind of higher realm, if you will. Anything that is transformative and transcendent. It's a union with all things. That's what mysticism has come to mean. Its Greek roots mean to conceal. So mysticism, mystical, mystery, all come from the same kind of thing. It means to conceal or to make hidden, if you will. Now, mysticism, we talked about in that particular program, we talked about how mysticism sort of bridges all religions and all belief systems. Not only every religion, but every belief system has its mystical branch to it. Everything from indigenous religions and folk religions like shamanism to the traditional, Protestant, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, even Hindu, and even Muslim traditions have their mystical branches that are sort of rooted in the religious tradition but go beyond it and connect with something that exists beyond the religious belief system or the set of rules that's been defined for that particular religion or belief system. So every kind of belief system has a mystical branch. Now, with modern spirituality and some of the New Age things, you have more of an emphasis on that too. But every belief system has something along those lines. For instance, in the Muslim tradition, you have the mystical branch, which is known as Sufism or Sufi. Sufi is Islamic mysticism, basically, or some call it the inward dimension of Islam. And it goes certainly beyond the doctrines and practices that traditional Islam uses. In traditions all over the world, every civilization, every culture began with an indigenous belief system. You might call it a nature religion or something of those along those lines. But every culture has started from that, and within those folk traditions, there's always a shamanic influence. There's always the member of the group, the member of the tribe, who is able to access the higher realms. And in the case of the shaman, communicate, access, travel, and serve as a conduit for those higher realms. And it's fascinating to think that every belief system has something about mysticism involved in it. And they are much more similar in their experiences, in the descriptions of them across the board, than they are different. So just from a researcher's point of view, if you find that level of commonality that cuts across diverse belief systems, belief systems that are so different from one another, then you have to sort of accept that this element that's in all of these things may be the most consistent, the most, or the closest to truth that we have. Now, some people, connect mysticism with religious ecstasy. There are, branches of Christianity in which either through fasting or through self-flagellation or through other means they reach a sort of a transcendent state. Branch from the chant that one uses when one's meditating in Eastern religion to the Gregorian chants that were popular in the Renaissance age of Christianity. And so on. So it is fascinating. So breaking down the variations of mysticism, we talked about how shamanism has been a prominent part of every traditional folk religion. In Western mysticism, Western mysticism is connected to Christian mystics. But before Christianity, there were what were known as the Eleusinian mysteries. Those were Greek cults that centered around the goddesses of Demeter and Persephone, and were held at Eleusis in ancient Greece. These were very secret, hush-hush kinds of cults in which it was believed that very powerful and very important wisdom was learned and had to be kept secret because it couldn't be shared with the vast majority of people who wouldn't know what to do with it. So then on in varying forms of Christianity, you have the idea of the Christian mystic, and then you also have Western esotericism, and these are in modern day times. Beginning in the 19th century, we had things like transcendentalism, which of course was Henry David Thoreau's belief of that we do exist beyond the physical. Theosophy, which we'll talk about when we get on to our other popular topics of last year, and Gnosticism, which is a form of Christianity which postulates or promotes direct knowledge of God.